Welcome to our discussion of the Declaration of Independence. I'm Professor Larry Swikart of A Wild World of History and co-author of Patriots' History of the United States. What we're going to do today is something that not many people do anymore. We're actually going to read the Declaration of Independence. I will read sections and then I will go back through and take them apart, break them down, comment on them. So let's just get started here. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. Folks, that's all one sentence. So let's break that down a little bit. First of all, you'll note that they refer to, and this is mostly Thomas Jefferson with some editing by Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, John Adams, and others in the Continental Congress. Jefferson says, the laws of nature and nature's God. He's referring to common law. And in A Patriot's History of the United States, Mike Allen and I lay out the 4 pillars of American exceptionalism, the first 2 of which are a Christian, mostly Protestant religious tradition and common law. What's common law? Common law is the notion that God puts the law in the hearts of the people, and the people elect or select representatives or leaders or rulers to carry out those laws. You say, well, what's so special about that? What's so special is nobody else on earth had that. The rest of Europe had been ruled through a concept known as divine right of kings, in which God put the law in the heart of the king, and he dispensed it downward. This later became what we call civil law under Napoleon, in which the rulers are entrusted with the law and they tell the people what to do. Common law is bottom up, divine right, civil law, top down. Very important distinction. So right off the bat, Jefferson says that we're dealing here with the laws of nature, i.e. common law, and of nature's God. So here's Jefferson, supposedly a deist, which I would disagree with, but that's another story. Here's Jefferson in the first sentence of the Declaration of Independence talking about God. Isn't that interesting? Then he says, to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they, who's the they there? The people who want to dissolve the bands. It's very important that you understand what the pronouns are referring to. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. In other words, it's only polite, it's only reasonable that if you're going to separate from someone, whether it's a divorce or you're moving away, you tell someone why you're doing it. What are your reasons? We hold these truths to be self-evident. What truths, Tom? I'm going to get to that. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All right? We hold these truths. What are these truths? That people are endowed with certain unalienable rights, okay? And that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So if you have a copy of the Declaration, it would be worthwhile for you to circle these truths and then go down the line to certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, so that you remember what we're talking about at all times. Jefferson says these are self-evident, obvious, that what? All men are created equal. Not just European men, not just white men, all men. This is 1776, folks, and there is nobody in the whole world saying this. Nobody, except Thomas Jefferson, that all men are created equal. That they, those men, are endowed by their Creator. Oh, there's God again. with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, pursuit of happiness, if you study the lexicon of the day, the verbiage of the day, pursuit of happiness always means property ownership. So you could say it this way, that to secure these rights, the right to life, liberty, and the ownership of property, governments are instituted among men. Now, this is going to be a little tricky. Jefferson's going to do a two-step here, because he seems to say that government here is artificial, right? If government is instituted among men, it didn't exist before this. That seems to be the implication, but just hang on. He's not going to say that. He says that to secure these rights, let's go back. What rights? To life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers. Okay, here's another pronoun issue. There, who's the there there? The there refers to governments. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Again, nobody else on earth is saying this. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, okay, circle these ends. What ends is he talking about? The end to secure the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. You see, reading some of these older texts, it's difficult to understand what they mean because their sentences are so long, so you've got to kind of break them down a little bit. So let's go back to that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of those ends, the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Now, if you just put a period there, the modern-day Libertarian Party would be just fine. That if government doesn't do its job, you can abolish it. But he didn't stop there, did he? He says, and to institute new government, laying its foundation, whose foundation? The new government. Laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them, who's the them there, the people, shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness, the people's safety and happiness. So, to say this in short, if government screws up and doesn't do what it's supposed to do, protect your right to life, liberty, and property, then you can get rid of it, but you have to set up a new one that will protect those rights, okay? Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light or transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are suffering than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. Another kind of long sentence, what does that mean? It means people are going to put up with a lot. I don't know if you saw that great movie Christmas Vacation, but there's a scene in Christmas Vacation where Clark Griswold goes outside and he sees Cousin Eddie emptying his septic tank into the sewer. And he says, "What are you doing?" And Cousin Eddie has a great line, which I can't repeat here, but it's something to the effect of, "The toilet is full," right? At some point, the toilet gets full and the people say, "That's it, I've had enough." But until that point, Jefferson says people are going to put up with a lot of stuff before they actually get mad enough to revolt. Well, evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they're accustomed. Why? They're accustomed to those forms. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them, who's the them? The people, under absolute despotism, it is their right, who's the there? The people. It is their duty, the people's duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for future security. So you set up a new government, but this time you got to make sure you've done it right, that you have safeguards for your security. Such has been the patient suffering of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their form of systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. So what Jefferson is saying is that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. This was a series of actions that the king took deliberately and constantly and repeatedly with a certain direction: tyranny. To prove this, prove what? That the king was engaged in tyranny, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So this is the part most people gloss over, because Jefferson's going to give you 27 specific offenses that King George committed against the colonies. First, he has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. So, first Jefferson says he won't let us pass laws that we need to have to govern ourselves. To prove this, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. And we often gloss over this, but Jefferson's going to give us 27 specific offenses that the king has committed against the people in the colonies. First, he has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. So he won't let the colonists pass their own laws. Second, he's forbidden the governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent could be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. So we pass a law, the governor of the colony sends it over to the king, and he ignores it. He says, you got to get on the job, buddy. Third, he's refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. In other words, there are people moving out west, and Virginia and other colonies want to allow them to have representation in the state assembly or the legislature, and the king isn't doing this. And this is a form of tyranny, and we're going to see this in our next discussion on the Articles of Confederation. Fourth, he, the king, has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. In other words, King George set up assemblies so far away from the majority of people that they can't come in and lobby the legislators. They can't come in and see the public records. They can't have any input into what's going on. And this is a form of tyranny. Fifth, he's dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. So if the legislature disagreed with the king, he would abolish the House of Representatives or the Assembly. Sixth, he has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsion within. In other words, he won't let them form a new legislature to deal with the issues. Seventh, he has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. So he's not letting them move westward and become regular citizens. 8, he's obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws in establishing judiciary powers. So the king isn't allowing them to establish courts. 9, he made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. So when he did approve a judge, it was only by his personal assent, and that judge was bound to the king in England. 10th, he's erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Boy, does this not speak of Washington, D.C. today. Multitude of offices and these hordes of officials who eat out our substance, and you have no control of them whatsoever. That was in the Declaration of Independence. 11, he has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without our consent or the legislators. In other words, you've got standing armies there rather than the militia, which was the way the colonies protected themselves. 12, he has effected to render the military independent of and superior to civil power. So the colonists had no control over these British soldiers who were there. 13, he has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. So he is setting up a government that doesn't respond to the people at all, or the state legislatures that have created these colonial constitutions. 14, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. People had to actually allow soldiers to live in their homes rent-free and eat up food. I mean, soldiers eat a lot, right? 15, for protecting them, the soldiers, by mock trial from punishment to any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. What does this refer to? The Boston Massacre. The feeling was that the government had protected these murderous soldiers. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world by the British Navy. For imposing taxes on us without our consent. That's number 17. Number 18, for depriving us in many ways of the benefits of trial by jury. 19, for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses. Both 18 and 19 refer to the fact that Americans were being taken to England for trial rather than being tried here in America in the colonies by a jury of their peers. 20, for abolishing the free system of English laws in neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule to these colonies. What the heck is he talking about there? This refers to a clause in the Intolerable Acts in which Canada was given authority to govern the American colonies. Now, this was bad in two big ways. First of all, they're Canadians, and they don't know what Americans are going through. But equally important to these Americans, the Canadians were Catholics. And here they are going to be trying to rule a group of Protestant, almost totally Protestant colonies. And this, to the founders, was just horrible, because this is one of the things they were trying to get away from in England and in Europe, was ruled by the Catholic Church, or the Church of England, right? They wanted to have their own churches. For taking away our charters, this is number 21. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government. That's pretty obvious. 22, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Again, he's kind of said this before. 23, he, the king, has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. 24, he's plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He's referring to revenue cutters and people who'd come ashore to get taxes and so forth. 25, he is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He's talking here about the Hessians, who were already on their way over to be a part of the British Army. 26, he's constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. In other words, he's taking people off American or colonial ships, imprisoning them, and this would be a cause of war in the War of 1812. The British don't quit doing this for another 20 or 30 years, okay? And 27, the king, he has excited domestic insurrections among us, has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So the king, Jefferson says, is out there fomenting these attacks and rebellions by the Indians. So those are the 27 causes of the American Revolution. That's a lot. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned to redress in the most humble terms our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. In other words, Jefferson says, look, it's not like we haven't tried. We've appealed to the king. We said, King, buddy, old pal, you got to fix some of this stuff. And he basically said, say, forget it. I'm not helping you out. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We've warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We've reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration, our settlement here. We've appealed to their native justice and magnanimity. We have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They, too, have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war and friends in peace. In other words, Jefferson says, it's not only that we went to the king, we went to Parliament, we went to the British people themselves, and it didn't matter. They wouldn't listen to us. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world, there's God again, 3 times already in the Declaration, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may, of right, do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, there's God. Number 4, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Now, before I get to this last part, let's look at something here. Note that Jefferson says that this is done by authority of the good people of these colonies, not by the authority of the colonies. And this will be very important when we come to the American Civil War. And the Confederate States are claiming the Declaration was issued in the name of the states, or back then, the colonies. Not true. The Declaration was issued in the name of the people of the colonies. And so it was the people of the United States that said you cannot secede from the Union. And lastly, we get to this final line, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. 56 men signed this. 56 men knew that by affixing their signature to this document, they were committing treason, which in English law was punishable by being drawn and quartered and then executed, okay? And when you're drawn and quartered, if you saw the movie Braveheart, the final scene, you know what I'm talking about. They strangle you, they tie you to 4 horses, you're ripped apart, they cut you to pieces. It's not pretty. Every one of them risked that by signing this document. It's adopted on the 4th of July, but the actual vote was passed on the 2nd of July, leading John Adams to write Abigail that July 2nd would be the most consecrated day in the epoch of America. He was only off by 2 days. Now, I can't go through all the signers, but I want to go through just a few of the signers here. Some of the signers were not present. Some say only 34 of the 56 signed that day, but almost all of them had signed by November of 1776. Among the signers were 2 presidents, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and the best single discussion of these signers is by Rush Limbaugh's father, Rush Limbaugh Jr., who wrote a piece called The Americans Who Risked Everything. And I wanted to give you just a few passages from that. Each had more to lose from the Revolution than he had to gain from it. John Hancock, one of the richest men in America, already had a price of 500 pounds on his head. He signed in enormous letters, he said, so that His Majesty could read his name without donning his sunglasses and could double the reward. Ben Franklin wryly noted after everyone signed, "Indeed, we must all hang together, or surely we shall hang separately." Fat Benjamin Harrison of Virginia told little Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, "With me, it'll be over in a minute, but you will be dancing in air for an hour after I am gone." These men knew what they risked, and they all paid a heavy, heavy price. Francis Lewis, the New York delegate, saw his home plundered and his estates in what is now Harlem completely destroyed by British soldiers. Mrs. Lewis was captured and treated with great brutality. Though she was later exchanged for 2 British prisoners through the efforts of Congress, she died from the effects of her abuse. William Floyd, another New York delegate, was able to escape with his wife and children across Long Island Sound to Connecticut, where they lived as refugees without income for 7 years. When they came home, they found a devastated ruin. Phillips Livingston had all of his great holdings in New York confiscated, his family driven from their home. He died in 1778, still working in Congress for the Revolution. Lewis Morris, the 4th New York delegate, saw all his timber, crops, and livestock taken. For 7 years, he was barred from his home and family. John Hart of Trenton, New Jersey, risked his life to return home to see his dying wife. Hessian soldiers rode after him as he escaped in the woods. While his wife lay on her deathbed, the soldiers ruined his farm and wrecked his homestead. At age 65, Hart slept in caves and woods as he was hunted through the countryside. When at long last, emaciated by hardship, he was able to sneak home, he found his wife had already been buried and his 13 children taken away. He never saw them again. He died a broken man in 1779 without ever finding his family, all because he dared sign the Declaration. Robert Morris, merchant prince of Philadelphia, delegate and signer, met Washington's appeals and pleas for money year after year. He made and raised arms and provisions which made it possible for the Continental Army to cross the Delaware at Trenton. In the process, he lost 150 ships at sea, bleeding his own fortune and credit almost dry. Thomas Nelson, signer of Virginia, was at the front in command of the Virginia military forces. With British General Charles Cornwallis in Yorktown, fire from 70 heavy American cannons began to destroy Yorktown piece by piece. Lord Cornwallis and his staff moved their headquarters to Thomas Nelson's own home. While American cannonballs were making a shambles of the town, the house of Governor Nelson remained untouched. Nelson turned in rage to the American gunners and asked, "Why do you spare my home?" And they replied, "Sir, out of respect to you." Nelson cried, "Give me the cannon!" And he turned the gun and fired on his own magnificent home himself, smashing it to bits. Nelson's sacrifice wasn't quite over. He raised $2 million for the revolutionary cause by pledging his estates. When the loans came due, the New York Peacetime Congress refused to honor them, and Nelson's property was forfeited. He was never reimbursed. He died impoverished a few years later at the age of 50. And then finally, there is New Jersey signer Abraham Clark. He gave 2 sons to the officer corps in the Revolutionary Army, and they were captured, sent to the infamous British prison hulk afloat in New York Harbor, known as the Hell Ship Jersey, where 11,000 American captives were held in one ship and were left to die. The younger Clarks were treated with special brutality because of who their father was. One was put in solitary and given no food. With the end almost in sight, with the war almost won, could anybody have blamed Abraham Clark for begging for mercy for the king and the parliament? The utter despair in this man's heart, the anguish in his very soul, must reach out to each and every one of us down through the 200 years when his answer was no. The 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence proved by their very every deed that they made no idle boast when they promised that they would give up their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor in order to see the new United States founded. And that, my friends, is our discussion of the Declaration of Independence. I'm Professor Larry Schweikart, co-author of A Patriot's History of the United States and founder of The Wild World of History.